investment on the continent, which I've been doing for many decades, many before some were born here. But it's a thrill to be here at this panel. We have a very distinguished group. To my right is Deputy Assistant Secretary Joy Basu. We're joined by the Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry from Botswana, the Honorable Uzi Kafela. We're also joined by Oke Hirijika, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Caribbean Office of the African Export-Import Bank. Welcome, Oke. Ms. Ann Alaker from Standard Bank, who is Head of Client Coverage, Corporate Investment Banking. And Farouk Gumel, who's Group Executive Director of the TGI Group. So welcome to you all, and I look forward to this conversation. Just let me set the scene for a little bit, just a couple thoughts on the context for AGOA and beyond. As we heard earlier, Africa, and according to the IMF, World Economic Outlook for April, the top 20 economies that are projected to experience the fastest growth rates in 2024, 9 are African countries. And overall, sub-Saharan Africa's predicted growth is 3.8%, which is higher than the global average of 3.2%, and makes the region the second fastest growing in the world. As we just heard from the Secretary General of the AFCFTA, Africa is poised to become the world's largest free trade area with more than $3.4 trillion of combined GDP. And I think it's important to underscore as well that there's been a 115% increase in the number of internet users in the region between 2016 and 2021, from 19 to 36%. It's clear that the region is facing a number of headwinds as well, defined by uneven recovery from the COVID pandemic, food insecurity exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, inflation, currency depreciation, the ravages of climate change and democratic backsliding, among others. But I think it's against this backdrop that I'm really excited to have this conversation with this very distinguished panel. So let me start with you, Das Basu, and Das is bureaucratic parlance, or a little inside baseball here, for Deputy Assistant Secretary. But Joy, let me ask you to give us an update on the renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. What are you expecting? When are we likely to see it? And what kind of changes do you think there will be to the legislation?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Whitney. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and of course to CCA for gathering us all today. I have to admit that if I had the answers to some of those questions, I would be in a different job, probably, predicting the future. But I will say that, as Ambassador Tai said, there is hearty support in the administration for not only the reauthorization of AGOA, but the modernization to be responsive to the current challenges, those that we'll need for our partnership over the next decade. That being said, of course, AGOA is a law, and so it is in the hands of our partners in Congress to reauthorize it, to think about how they will approach it before 2025. Of course, we have encouraged them to reauthorize early, to send a strong signal to the business community and to our African partners that this truly is a foundation of our U.S.-Africa trade and a foundation for private sector-led economic growth, which is what brings most of us here today. I think I have been very grateful, particularly in the last few months, from all the partnership we've had from the Hill, from both parties, from both houses. Obviously, there have been a few pieces of legislation that have been introduced, which is very exciting, and we've had great conversations with our partners on the Hill. And I think what you will see in the coming weeks and months is increasing number of hearings, increasing dialogue, but I think it's a real opportunity for everyone in this room to continue to engage with Congress about what you would like to see and what the ideas are to make AGOA more impactful and more strategic. I think the good news is that there is bicameral and bipartisan support for AGOA, but again, I am here to be practical, and so I would also say it's not something that any of us can take for granted. the team, everyone in this room, to continue to make that case to Congress and help them make the case when it comes to all the legislation they have to pass. And that comes, as Ambassador Tai said, from increasing utilization rates, from increasing investments, from improving the enabling environment, and showing Congress that if the authorization comes through again and is reauthorized, that it will lead to a more transformational effect for the next 1-2 decades, which is what all of us are here to see. So I know that's not the precise answer that any of us would want, but I am hopeful, and that is thanks to our partners on the Hill and everything that our colleagues in the room are doing.
Yeah, great, thank you. Let me just follow up on 1 or 2 points about increased utilization rates and increased investments. If you had a magic wand, what would you like to see done to increase utilization rates and to increase U.S. investment in Africa?
The 2 things I would want is actually something Whitney, you and I have talked about a lot. I would want to see more utilization strategies developed and published by our partners on the continent. I think the data shows that the countries that utilize AGOA best are the countries that have a whole of government strategy at the federal level that works across industries and with the subnational levels to really utilize AGOA. It's not anything that one industry can take on alone. It's not just in the hands of the industry of trade. It also requires good transportation. It requires energy. It's that cohesive strategy. That is one thing I would like to see if I had a magic wand. And the second I would like to see if I had a magic wand was an easier way of translating to MSMEs on the continent how they make the most of AGOA. We know that there are so many incredible innovators and entrepreneurs on the continent, and I would like to see more ways of showing them why AGOA makes it more competitive for them to export, not only to the United States, but to the world, and helping them do so. I think that's really challenging to reach all those small businesses, but we should work together between the United States and our African partners on creating the right ways in which we can give those MSPs those tools to really make the most of this incredible program.
Great, thank you very much. And let me come to you as a member of the private sector and somebody who works with one of the leading financial institutions on the continent, has a presence in 20 African countries, and get your perspective on a number of the issues that Joy was just talking about how AGOA can be improved to foster increased trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa.
Yeah, thanks, Whitney. Let me just start by saying I really love the answer Joy gave about the increased utilization and the importance of the national landscape, because I think it's quite critical. And what is it that we see? We see low utilization. Like everybody else, we see better utilization when there's a national plan that supports that. So really I see AGOA as an opportunity, and it involves both the US government, Congress, and all the participating countries on the continent. From our clients' perspective, we really see that, like in every industry, clients and businesses rely and require policy consistency. So the benefit of having the national utilization processes is that the businesses can actually respond to that. They can actually design their businesses and invest in a manner that gives that removes some unpredictability, and that to some extent takes me a little bit to AGOA and the length of time. So it's coming up, it's about to expire. I think there's an opportunity to consider how long the next period is, because businesses are built not just for 5 years but for the longer term. So that's definitely one thing. Then the last comment I'll really make is about agility and being nimble. And that's always a very difficult thing to talk about when you're talking to a government and several other governments. But from a business perspective, that's quite critical. Because we all operate in a scenario and environment where not all else remains consistent. Things do change. So is there something that can be done within AGOA or within the national plans that allows for that element of being nimble? And then you're probably going to say, so what does that look like? I don't have a specific answer, but I can actually draw your attention to things that we have seen operate. And there's a lot of growing talk about unilateralism And that almost by its very nature takes an element of the implementation out of the formal process into something that's more issue-oriented and fosters and requires agility. And it's agility to enable private sector to really deliver and play its role, because AGOA is based on private sector playing its role.
Great. Let me ask you about policy, certainly, because I think it's a two-way street. Because we've seen countries can lose their bill benefits. And I'm just interested in your private sector perspective on that, and how you see AGOA. Is it mixed message governance and trade, or is that the right thing it should be doing?
I was partly hoping you wouldn't ask me that, to be honest. The private sector really talks about policy consistency. There's an element of AGOA that's outside of the business environment. It's really not for me to comment on whether or not any particular nation should include that in their trade agreements. I don't think I want police to say that. But it does potentially introduce some uncertainty. So what do I think as a consequence of that? I think a consequence of that is that we will see greater utilization in African countries that do have more predictable and consistent policies. And that's probably an elegant way of responding to your question.
I think we get your point, right? Good governance matters in trade and in everything else. And on that, let me shift to you, Honorable Minister. We were talking earlier, and you were very candid by saying Botswana actually hasn't taken too much advantage of them. And I would just love you to talk to us more about that, sort of what you see the challenges are, and how you might address that, or how folks on the Hill who are thinking about when you would go, what they should be thinking about that they're not aware of.
Thank you very much. We as policymakers and lawmakers, decision makers, we listen to the private sector, and they speak. And when I said to you that we have not done well, it's in response to what I heard from the private sector. One of the many things which they point out to is, firstly, lack of capacity to be able to properly use AGOA. They also cite complicated procedures set up here in the US, which they find extremely difficult to overcome. They cite costliness of trade generally, which makes it prohibitive for them to gain access. And they also cite lack of market intelligence, which they find very difficult to take a grip of. As a result, which they find themselves not doing much what it is that is required of them to be able to meet the US market. But I must say to you, Botswana has had a fair share of benefit from AGOA. In the 2008 or so, through textiles, but we then regressed in that regard, the cause of which is a topic for another day maybe. Another challenge which I see as a minister is quite often I find that those companies, my assessment of African continent, the environment in Africa, which make it into AGOA, are gigantic countries. SMEs find it extremely difficult because of their small size. Perhaps joint ventures, if SMEs could form joint ventures and form partnerships so that they join forces together, maybe it could be easier for them to gain access to AGOA. But as it is, going it alone, as we often do, as single-family-owned companies, as most of them are, it makes it extremely difficult for them to really make ends meet coming to them, given the costliness of the US market. But we are working hard back in Botswana. People are not so acquainted with this, just knowledgeable And I suppose this is borne by the fact that most they were skewed more in the direction of public procurement, an economy based on public procurement. It was on export and private sector led. So I think that could be a challenge. It takes time to wean African continents of that position. But I think the AFCFTA now at the palm of our hands, every led steered by Mr. Kelamani here, I think gradually we're moving towards the private sector-led economies. And I think that is really what AGOA is about. It speaks about being eligible. One of the things being looked at is promotion of private sector-led economies and economies which are market-based and less hinged on governments.
Great, thank you. I take your point about the complexity of the U.S. market. I remember once giving a talk in Johannesburg and making the point that the African market is not for the faint-hearted. And I was quickly reminded, sir, the American market isn't for the faint-hearted either. And I think we have a lot of work to do. But let me come back to you. You mentioned capacity building. In the current draft legislation that was introduced by Congressman Coons, Senator Coons and Senator Rich, they actually call for capacity building. Where would you like it to be directed most immediately, and to whom?
To the players themselves, the tradesmen and the tradeswomen. Governments don't trade. It's the private sector which trades. So capacity building needs to be geared towards empowering those. I think when AGOA first saw the light of day was communicated and we all adopted it, we forgot to focus on building the capacity. All that occurred then was a sudden opening of the market, but not going to the root or to the playgrounds to determine whether those who are going to be gaining access to the market in the first place have the capacity to do so. So I think along the calendar, we then realized that when there was low uptake of the product, we realized where really the problem was, and we identified the problem to be capacity issues. And we're very grateful that from your end, from the Metron end, they realized and acknowledged that it was a challenge and we're working on it to capacitate. Because without that capacity building, we're going to continue suffering this low uptake of AGOA, which then leads the Congress to, at present, to start doubting its usefulness and seriously considering in 2025 bringing it to an end. And I think that's really what's at the forefront of Congress, the Congress at the moment, that why move on with it if it's such low capacity? Rome wasn't built in a day. It wasn't built in a day.
Thank you. Let me shift to OK and ask you, the Africa Export-Import Bank does many things on the continent. They've really played quite a critical role, but I think chief among them is being the driver of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. Can you give us an update on the status of the implementation of the PAPSS? And how many countries and financial institutions are involved? And what volume of financial activity are we seeing, are you experiencing? And I think this innovation has been so important, sort of streamlining the currency issue across the continent. So we'll just be interested in your thoughts and sharing what things are.
Yeah, thank you very much, Whitney. The idea of having the AFCFTA kick off, and open up the $1.3 billion market is something that everybody understands is the priority. And to be able to make that happen in the level that we think it should, means that it also needs to be matched by a stable payment system, whereby people don't rely heavily on the USD. We know recently there was this unintended consequence of the heightened compliance requirement, where a lot of African banks lost correspondence and are unable to make payments in USD. And of course, the fact that Africa has about 25 different currencies. So if we need to see AFCFTA work, it means there has to be a stable payment platform that actually supports the increase. So that's what led the bank to think about creating this integrated whereby it's easy for somebody who exports goods in Nigeria to receive Naira, and somebody who receives the goods in Ghana pays in cedis. So that's innovative, and that means the advantage those exporters, those buyers will take is in the increased market space that AFCFTA offers. And they don't need to worry about how is it that they're going to get their funds or how is it not going to happen. So we are paying serious attention to it, and I'm happy as well with the level of attention that it is getting around the continent. The African Union has actually endorsed it, and implementation has started off in earnest. So currently we have over 13 countries on the platform. So that's huge. I mean, given that it's something that only started recently, and had to move past through a period where COVID had to slow things down. So that is happening rapidly. We have over 160 financial institutions who have also signed up to it, African enterprise. And the idea is that it opens up an opportunity for them to be able to support their clients who are involved in cross-border trade, to be able to easily make and receive payments for transactions that will happen within the firm. And that's important. So we will also want to maybe possibly see it expand into including fintechs. Okay, so who are the ones also that are making it possible? For instance, those in diaspora who want to make payments back home, and they will see how that gets integrated into the tax platform. That people also can receive and make able to get accounts for using this kind of platform. And I believe the impact is going to be massive. In the sense that we want to see inter-African trade grow, we want to see AFCFTA grow, and how that also ties to as well the amazing in the sense that with the increased productivity capability for those who are within this framework, it means also as well we also see a lot more traction within the continent within this value that is great. So having talked about PAPs, also it makes sense also maybe to talk about what Appraising Bank and the bank also is doing actively to promote AFCFTA and make sure that it sees the light of the day. As SG will always say, the bank, Appraising Bank and the AFCFTA secretariat are like CMP's twins, right? So it means that most of the things that we do, we actually do together. So we have not only made it one of the core pillars of our strategy, implementation of AFCFTA, we also done tangible things apart from the PAPS platform, the PAPS platform that we have created. So we feel also we need to do something on the logistics and facilitation side to make sure that goods are able to flow seamlessly across the current borders that we have now, pending when we bring them down, right? Which is what the program is all about. So the transit guarantee program also is something that's going to help make sure that these things move very seamlessly across borders. Some of the facilitation effort that we're doing is something that also we think is significantly going to make the AFCFTA trade become a reality quicker. The adjustment fund, which is another critical part of it, is something that we also helped to set up to be able to support countries to manage the impact when was the AFCFTA kick off. So that's something that was basically launched and being managed collaboratively with the Secretariat.
Thank you very much for that. It's very, very interesting, very exciting. Let me turn to Farouk, because you lead up the Group Executive Director of the General Investments Group, which has diversified interests in investments in Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, Ivory Coast, South Africa, Morocco, among other markets. So I think you're sort of the spokesperson for a lot of what we're talking about here in many respects. And we'd just love for you to comment on, how AGOA, how you see AGOA, if you utilize AGOA, but also on the payment system, if you utilize that, and how AI figures into your technology and communicating across the various countries.
Thank you. So first on AGOA, I think what is important is for us to understand that the fundamentals is about free trade and duty exemption when it comes to shipping items to the U.S. That is the foundation of it. That when you export to the US, you don't pay duties to import. When it was established over a decade ago, it made sense. But as things evolved, the dynamics of global trade has changed since then. So the uniqueness of no duty no longer exists. And what we've seen was China came in, and after China came in, India showed up, and more recently, the United Arab Emirates. And the UAE is fighting aggressively to take over the market share. And if you look at the US share of trade or exports from Africa, it's diminishing. And that decline is, nothing has changed apart from new players have showed up offering the same, if not better. So for example, our business, we do more than $1 billion of turnover, we're private. And when we come to export, we don't do a lot of war, because many of the people that buy from us eventually get it to the US, and they get it more efficiently than us from Africa direct. So you find a lot of African products go to the US via Vietnam, for example, via India, because there are certain additionalities that are needed to meet the US requirements, which was mentioned by the Honorable Minister. So when it comes to upgrading AGOA, I think there is a need to go back and look at what is the competition doing. And that competition, like I said, India is very, very aggressive. And most of the new players that we're seeing from the United Arab Emirates actually turn out to be African businesses that are setting up their trading offices in the UAE to enable them to capitalize on better financing structures, better accessibility that is not available in the continent. And when we talk about the free trade area, for example, that has existed for hundreds of years. There's nothing new about free trade in Africa. It actually exists. What does not exist is fairness of cross-border trade within Africa. There is no fair trade in Africa because it's a very parasitic setting. You find country A, which is big, and it manufactures, it tries to look after its own growing population. And then there's country B, which is small, and it does not manufacture, but it has a port. And so it imports, and those items find their way into country A, which is trying to backward integrate, and therefore undermines that domestication of manufacturing that country A is trying to achieve. And so I think what we expect to see from the trade agreement, the continental trade agreement, is more fairness. How do we find the balance to it? When we say it's Africa, let me give an example of Europe. Europe as a geographical entity starts from France and probably ends in Russia and bordering Japan. That is Europe as a geography. But the European Union as an ideology is only 27 countries and it stops at Poland. There is no African ideology today. So what we have is a piece of land with 53, 54, 55 countries, wherever you talk, and we say that is Africa. And so Africa, because we're all on the same continent and the same part of land, we should be able to trade. But that is not the reality. There are different ideologies, there are different people, and as the earlier presidential panel was sitting there, I was a bit mischievous. I did a Google search to see the trade between Cape Verde and Liberia, and it was $24,000. And then I checked Malawi and Cape Verde, and it was $6,000. And so, how do we now get ourselves to move beyond rhetoric? What is it that makes us Africans, that makes us want to trade with Africa? Because if you check the external trade between Malawi and the world, or the external trade between Liberia and the world, and the external trade between Cape Verde and the world, it's the same countries that are trading with them. It is the same European countries, the same Asian countries, and the same North American countries that trade with these three countries, but those three countries amongst themselves in aggregate do not do $40,000 So, for example, we have a factory in Benin Republic,
Yeah.
and we have factories in Nigeria, and we have operations in Ghana. Now, Benin services Burkina Faso and Niger, but now we have sanctions. We have an issue with Niger. So when Benin has opened its borders, Niger has not. So how do you get your product into the market? Some people buy it, and somehow it happens. When you also say, in Nigeria, for example, we manufacture a lot of products, and again, people buy, which is why I said it's free trade, and then it shows up. So, and these people have, or these families that are these traders, they've been doing it for decades, if not centuries. And so, and they don't have names, they were all traders until probably maybe 30 years ago, and all of a sudden, they were branded smugglers. And so when you go to some of these border towns, and you're talking to some of these people, they don't even know smuggling is wrong. So when you ask them, what do you do? Oh, I'm a smuggler. You know? And it's because they were just given a label. They were traders before, and then they've now transitioned to smuggling. And when we design policies and we sit down in our offices and we create these things, you know, we don't engage these traders to understand what is that reality that they live in.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, let me come back to you on the AI in a second, and we'll just keep it going. Very interesting. Thank you for that. Joy, let me come back to you. I was just struck, it was mentioned earlier, how much trade and investment that this administration has promoted in Africa. Some 900 deals across 47 countries for a total estimated value of $22 billion. Those are good numbers. And I'm just interested, what are the lessons learned? I mean, is this a one-off? How do we keep growing that? And interested in the thoughts you have.
Of course, thank you. I think on the good news, I am so proud of those numbers because I'm proud of the Biden administration's focus on increasing two-way trade with Africa. And a big foundation of our strategy with Sub-Saharan Africa is this economic partnership. I think as we think back to the AGOA question, I would encourage us to think about how we modernize it. How do we think about everything from digital economies to critical minerals? How do we make sure this 21st century economic partnership is working for all of our people? So I think I'm very proud of the emphasis that has driven those deals and our work with the private sector and our work across a whole of government approach to trade. That being said, I think everyone in this room that knows that the potential is so much greater. And as my colleague up here said, trade is actually coming down relatively when it comes to U.S. and Africa, and when it comes to other countries who see the incredible value on the continent in trade and in the people on the continent. And so I think we need to do more, both to meet the needs on the continent, but also to create the solutions that all of us are relying on. I think the beautiful thing about the market is that it fundamentally is about meeting people's needs. And that is why so much of our work is on championing private sector-led growth. I think there are three things that I want to see. One, I want to see more events like this that highlight the incredible opportunities on the African continent. So thank you all for being a part of our team in that. Thank you all for being here. I think we need to tell those stories more loudly. I think we need to create those connections, make those market matches more, and make it easier for American businesses and African businesses to trade and to make that easier. The second thing I think I want to see is a correction of risk perception on the continent. We need to make sure in two ways. One, that the biases of the past are not biasing the future when it comes to trade in Africa. We know it is a hard environment, but that is every market, right? That is not unique to Africa. So I think we need to do better about telling that risk story and making sure it's fair. And that risk perception, whether it's the credit rating agencies or just other investors who are new to the continent. And I think another part of that, though, is we need to make sure that we're right-sizing risk perceptions, but we're also differentiating between markets. There are so many incredible governments that are creating the right enabling environments, and so, all 54 countries, yes, we want to see more trade within them because that makes it easier to trade across them. But we also want to be directing and highlighting the governments that are doing the right thing to ease their business environments. And so that's a lot of what my team does, is try to spotlight the policies that are sometimes very difficult to make, but that really do make it easier for companies to invest and to succeed. The third thing I would say is, this has been a passion of mine for decades across my career. And, the headlines have been really difficult in the last year. The coups and democratic backsliding, that is not unique to Africa at all. We see it all over the world. And so that is where I go back to my point about being fair on risk. But I also think that we cannot be complacent about those who are We need to expect better, and we need to demand better. That is what we share in terms of our values. And so I'd say I want to see those enabling environment challenges get better, not for necessarily for business first, but for the people who live in those countries. And the last thing I'll say is things like this there are so many good news stories, and let's keep amplifying those. So many of the bad news stories take precedent in the news. And so my challenge to everyone here is to, I see phones out, use your phones, use your businesses to tell the good news stories, to come back to the point of there's so much opportunity, there's so much more we can do than the $20 billion we've already done.
Yeah, this is
Doesn't
true.
matter.
No, but let me just drill down to $22 billion, because that didn't happen by accident. I mean, I presume this is President Biden's leadership saying we're all in, but also having instruments like DFC, Prosper Africa. Is that how we got the $22 billion?
It is, and it is careful coordination across all my colleagues here from the U.S. government, with Prosper, with DFC, with Commerce, and us being really coordinated. And I think it's something that we need to keep doing to make sure that we're using all the tools of the U.S. government in a synchronous way to pull in the same direction. Some economies are, focused for MCC, and we should make sure that we're pulling in the same direction to really drive economic growth. And there are many economies where, players like Commerce and DFC can be much more active. So yes, it's been a very deliberate effort. It's been close collaboration. It's been wonderful colleagues who are in the room. It doesn't happen by accident. And it happens because of the businesses that are here, right? I recently came to the government a few years ago from the private sector, and we are only a small enabler. It is really the companies that are out there that are doing the hard work. And so, you are our team, but you're right, none of this happens by accident, and we can't let our foot off the gas.
Great, thank you. And let me shift to you and ask you to follow up on what Oke was talking about the PAP system, because presumably Standard Bank is quite impacted and is part of this. But I would also like you just to address the risk question too. How Standard Bank is seeing Africa risk. There's quite a debate about, does Moody's have it right, and where are you on that?
I'll start with a risk question so we can continue having the conversation, so to speak. And this is something very close to my heart. So we operate on the continent, but primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the questions I'm always asked is, how do you manage the risk? And I take a step, I take a beat when I'm asked that question, because I operate in these markets. Like any good financial institutions, we want to have a profitable business. We have effective risk practices. They're very much the same ones my colleague who in Europe or US or Asia apply in their markets. But for some reason, when we're talking about the continent, everyone thinks it's a little different. And so, if I think of my 20 years at Standard Bank, and I look at our loss ratios in corporate investment bank, are excellent. That's because our clients are great, but they operate in markets, in countries that there's a narrative outside of Africa that it's highly risky. All that does really is increase the cost of capital, which is fine. But what it also does, it reduces the opportunity for people outside Africa to do business in Africa. And so if you're going to be selfish, then I'll certainly say that's something that's worth thinking about. If your risk perception is inconsistent with what you see the effective and consistent and profitable banks do on the continent, then you're losing out on an opportunity. But that would be my response to this. Now I'll go to PAPS and finish this conversation. So I think PAPS is one of those great enabling structures and processes. And I say enabling because the Continental Free Trade Agreement is real. I think its time has come. I think it will take, like anything great, it might take a little while for us to see the impact. And then we'll all look back and we will wonder why it hadn't happened before. But if you think about your comments around traders on the continent, so you look at around East Africa, I look at our bank, and you can see where the traders are because those branches, they're taking a lot of cash. So those traders are effectively, in a very physical sense, using PAPS. So what does PAPS do? It enables the companies, larger companies, to actually try to operate in their own local currency. And everybody wants to operate in their local currency. US businesses operate in their local currency because it also mitigates the risk to some extent. But 26 local currencies on the continent is tough. Standard Bank, we're already in 20 of those countries. So we signed an MOU with AfriExim, and that's really about being part of the settlement bank. So we see it as part of introducing financial instruments to enable that to happen. Because having PAPS is one thing, actually having banks who will be there and enable the settlement to happen, and it's not a theoretical thing. You can do that because you already operate in those countries. You already have local currency liquidity. You can work with colleague banks in Nigeria to ensure that KES settlement actually takes place. Because you're both in Nigeria and in Kenya. You're in South Africa, which is a large country, it's a large economy that where South African companies could actually operate on the continent. So that's part of what we're doing with PAPS. There's a lot of detailed hard work. It's great when the governments have actually signed up. And as they sign up, the chief execs in each of our presence countries put more pressure on the team, like when are we getting PAPS? But that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. So taking the traders and moving from the physical to transaction within the financial sector, I think will be good for us. Because PAPS are really useful in telling us where things are moving. And it just helps with planning overall. But very, very keen on PAPS. Been looking, to be honest, at some of the other regional systems, like the East African payment system. Some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not be familiar with it. The difference between PAPS and the East African payment system, well, the East African payment system is the central banks that provide the settlement. But there are lessons to be learned. And the lesson to be learned, which I think is useful for PAPS, is actually the traders and the businesses haven't taken it up to the extent that we thought they would. Even though that is between Kenya shilling and Uganda shilling, or Kenya shilling and Tanzania shilling. When I ask them, sometimes they're still trying to hedge their US dollar obligations. That's part of it. The other part of it is actually increased liquidity. Liquidity will mitigate a lot of this. So it's going to be a long, I think it's going to be a long road. I think we've just started. In the short term, if you don't feel an immediate impact, that's okay. We are really looking about more the medium term. From a banker, 5 years is really not a lot from a medium term perspective. I hope that was sort of...
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that great insight into PAPS and Grace. Mr. Gustav, let me come to you. I was just sort of taken by Farouk's comment that free trade isn't fair in Africa. And as trade minister, how do you see that? How do you see traders from Botswana trading into the region? Part of AFCFTA, you're part of the Southern African Development Community. How fair is free trade from your perspective?
I think I'm mixed. My response is mixed, but there are some occasions when you meet up with what leaps up to the eye as fair aspect of free trade. Some countries it's fair. What I can say about Botswana is we are a small economy. South of us is a well-established economy in South Africa, which has had a very fair share of skills imports. I think this one came shortly after the Second World War. A lot of skills import, people from Europe migrating down to South Africa. So they've had a fair share of that benefit, which I think attribute the rapid industrialization of them to that acquisition of skill. But what AFCFTA does for us is this. Sometimes reaching the American market, it doesn't immediately become apparent to the eye that a small community economy is actually getting access to the American market, but through a large economy. For instance, I can cite the example our relationship with South Africa. They export vehicles. They find their way here to the American shores, but within those vehicles you find harnesses and wiring. Manufacturing goes on. So it's a way by which, through the AFCFTA and relaxation of tariffs and all the impediments to free trade across the continent, we're able to benefit and eventually find our produce coming into. But that doesn't get spoken about, of course. But when we were at US Africa Summit last year, it was one of the things that we thought must be spoken about, so we get to know that part of the imports which come in are made up of Botswana produce. But I think there's a great potential. When we must be grateful to our heads of state that they conceived of the AFCFTA. They must have been troubled by something. They must have acknowledged that there was a need to improve trade within Africa. They must have acknowledged that there was some element of unfairness in the way things were done then, and they conceived of it. And it's for us ministers of trade to implement it. And we can't go back. We have crossed the Rubicon here with it. We got to ensure that it gets implemented, whether we meet up with obstacles or not. Last year I was told by an expert that, Minister, you speak so proudly of the AFCFTA, all fanfare, bring trumps and fruits, but you don't have an African market. Quite said to me with that degree of candor, but it's for us to dissect and work together, positive and not despairing at all, ensuring that these instructions will be given by heads of state, we implement them, and we are committed to implementing the AFCFTA. We are starting to see some results. Baby steps they are, but we are starting to see some results, and that's why I said Rome wasn't built over a year. AGOA came in 2000, I think, looking at it, it might be way too short a period for us to be expecting to see flourishing industries consequent upon it. It will take some time, but beyond it, push comes to shove. American Congress says we're not renewing it. We'll have to then possibly fall back on the generalized system of preferences of 1974. We may have to expand on it, add more product lines on it if Americans can accept that. But obviously, Africans, there's not a single syllable of dissent on this sentiment that we all wish that it be renewed beyond 2025. We were here last year, last year before last, when heads of state from Africa have congregated here, invitation of Joe Biden. We met in sideline meetings. There's not a single syllable of dissent on the view that Agua should be. In fact, others said we should be there permanently. And obviously, some leadership, those in leadership here said it's a tough call that cannot be done. But it's a prospect. It bears prospects for us of growth. And I think the general commitments and aspirations contained in AGOA and in the AFCFTA, they are well-meaning and they are well-intending. I think we must be positive about this.
Great. Thank you very much. Quick question, Mr. Minister. Only one African country exports beef to the United States under AGOA, and it's not Botswana. And given Botswana's world-class beef, any chance we might be seeing it on these shores anytime soon?
Yes, I was envious. The minister in that country said we managed to, in Namibia, said we managed to find a way into America. And And I ask myself, why haven't we? One of the things that I think we often face, sometimes I thought it's only in Africa where we occasion delays in decision making. I found it even here in America, we occasion delays. In Oregon, delays in committees or organizations having to overcome sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, and we are told that if you're lucky, if it occurs in a year. I was in a quite a displeasing way, coming from an economy which is considered to be developed governments to be told you'll be lucky if you get it in a year. Right now we're here, American shores, we're in hot pursuit of finding our citrus fruit and gaining access to the American market. But the largest citrus plantation, arguably in Africa. Well, South Africa may say that's not true, but I think it's the largest in Africa, established. Fruits don't know a calendar, they grow continuously. So they can't wait. They can't wait for committees to sit and determine when they reach certain maturity. Stages of development, they've got to hit the market. And if men and women are undecided, we're going to take this fruit, it will be the lunch of animals. Because we can't sell them, we give them to animals. So I found that to be the case here, that phytosanitary and sanitary requirements can be quite difficult. But we also need candor. We need to be open with each other. I know not of any country which has these import disincentives. And I know not of any which does not have export incentives. So if there's an import disincentive, let us tell us about it so that we can have a candid discussion to find out what causes you discomfort, which we can then correct in order for you to accept our product. So we should have those discussions with candor. If there are questions of political pressure, tell us. We need to know if there are pressure from producers, tell us. Then we will understand. We will then have an engagement which is based on a common source of reference. And once we don't come out clear with each other and we're not candid, I was quite pleased when Farouk was quite candid in his deliberation. Only then can we really, arrive at solutions, proper solutions.
Great. Thank you.
But we want our beef to come as the best.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I found that beef in Australia when I visited. Somebody had commented. I think a trademark. I found beef displayed as Mazona beef at an outlet in Australia. Well, I was a visitor and I couldn't be a good visitor. So I couldn't go up to that person and say, how do you display it as Mazona beef? Really, clearly, it's not. It's not. And it must be beef from Australia. But the fact that you display it as Mazona beef is an indication to me that Mazona beef speaks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Minister. We're running out of time now. Two more quick questions. Okay, for you. AfriExcel has been paying close attention to the African diaspora and sort of making sure that they're part of the commerce of the continent, even though they aren't in diaspora. Can you talk about steps that AfriExcel is doing specifically to address that issue?
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Following the historic declaration by the African Union, of course recognizing the diaspora as a sixth region, it made sense that of course, focus is concentrated on trying to boost the relationship between Africa and Africa in diaspora. And in 2016, when we launched our intra-African trade strategy, actually we wrote Africa with emphasis on the N at the end, so which is African. So which means we're not talking about Africans in the geographical region called Africa, the continent. We're talking about Africans anywhere they can be globally. And that is the truth. And so that is why for us it is important to try and pay attention to fostering that relationship between Africa and Africa diaspora, because it is important due to the shared historical and cultural ties. We need to make sure that we foster that. Anywhere you go around the world today, you say, well, we want to eat Chinese restaurant. So why can't you go somewhere and say African restaurant? we need to make sure that we support those kind of activities that make Africans, wherever they are, to be able to touch base with what is happening back home. Recently, one of the ways, of course, we recognize the Caribbean, with huge African population, and so African diaspora population is key. So we had to set up a branch in the Caribbean, which we are running currently, and to ensure or to portray the emphasis that we place on fostering this relationship. Our next annual meeting is going to actually take place in the Caribbean. So it's going to be in the Bahamas, Nassau, Bahamas, from 12th to 15th of June. And it's the first time it's happening in that region. And that's for us to say we believe in connecting Africa and African diasporas. And that's something that we want to see grow. Because we believe that African diasporas have a key role to play in the development in Africa, be in terms of investment back home. So we want to be that conduit that also can help them identify strategic projects that they want to see family invested in, because they want some place that have an impact where they are from. So it's our interest to see that happen. Together with of course, we are having the opening of Afraising Bank Africa Diaspora Center. So it's going to be in New York here. So actually focus on also connecting African diaspora communities within the U.S. There are a lot of African U.S. cities that have huge African American populations. You want to see they have somewhere that can galvanize or coming together to put together their ideas, and bring it back home for effective development. That's something that everybody will take advantage of.
Great. Thank you very much. And just quickly for 30 seconds, just coming back to that last question, the role of AI in your business. How do you use that, or are you using it?
Zero. We invest more on man-eye, not AI, so human intelligence. You can't leapfrog reality. The reality is we're still trying to understand what is happening. So when you come up with AI, tech, whatever it is, it just doesn't work. But I know I have 20 seconds. And I have to talk about Botswana beef. I know I'm in Texas, right? But that's the only thing I can remember from the last summit. The beef in Botswana was fantastic. I kid you not. I missed, they had like a barbecue thing outside the event, I remember. And there was a guy called Chef Tabo. I still have his picture on my screensaver. And he had the best steak ever. I missed 2 sessions because of that. And I actually bought 40 kgs of Botswana beef and flew back to Nigeria. So, congratulations, you must get into the US.
Okay, well, I think that's a perfect note to end on Botswana beef. And it's also lunchtime, which is a good segue. But just let me thank all the panelists for a very candid conversation. Thanks CCA for bringing us all together. And please join me in giving a round of applause.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you may now proceed to lunch, which will be held in the D Hall on the second floor.
That's good. Thank you.